How's it going, guys? I'm Abysmal, and I'm the Guildmaster and Raid Leader of a 2-night Mythic Raiding Guild in World of Warcraft. On this channel I talk about the systems behind running stable raiding guilds, roster building, recruitment, and benching, and that kind of thing. I think one of the biggest reasons guilds struggle long term has nothing to do with mechanics, DPS, or progression. It's mostly around burnout, and not specifically player burnout, but officer burnout. And let's get into the reasons why and how this happens, and also some ways to avoid it, perhaps. We're on the push for 1,000 subs, guys, so if you enjoy my content, it helps me out greatly if you could leave a sub or like the video if you enjoy my content. I also stream over on Twitch, so come catch me over there for some Mythic Plus. Link will be in the description. Let's get on with the video. So the difficult part is that most guilds don't notice it happening until the damage kind of already has been done. Mostly because officers usually, they don't just disappear. They don't just wake up one day and decide they're finished. It usually happens much slower than that. It can appear as they stop talking as much, they stop getting involved, things start getting delayed, communication becomes less consistent or just disappears entirely. The energy just changes. And eventually the guild starts feeling different, even if nobody can immediately explain why. I think a lot of players underestimate how much work actually happens behind the scenes in a guild, especially in progression environments, because from the outside it mostly just looks like raid night. You know, you log in, show up, raid, log off again. You pull the boss, maybe discuss some strategies for a bit, and then, like I said, you log off. But for officers and raid leaders, the guild usually doesn't stop existing when raid ends. There's always something happening, may that be recruitment, roster planning, logs, attendance issues, scheduling, loot decisions, conflict between players or between decisions that leadership have made, and potentially within leadership itself there can be conflict there. And trying to keep morale stable after a bad raid night is also one of those things. The list continues to grow, and most of that work is invisible because it's supposed to be, you know. People in the guild aren't meant to see the day-to-day workings of what goes on behind the scenes, but that's also the dangerous part, because when work is when work is invisible, people naturally underestimate how much of it exists. And honestly, this is something I've been thinking about a lot recently. In my own guild, we've recently had one of our officers step away, and a big part of this, and a big part of it was just life moving forward. You know, life priority changing, all these normal things. But at the same time, it also made me realize how much responsibility he quietly accumulated over time without most people really noticing it. So, for example, they handled all of our raid loot, dealt with a lot of the political side of the guild, monthly gold contributions for consumables, discussion around fairness, and the awkward conversations that nobody else really wanted to deal with, i.e. regarding loot and questions that would be fired his way on decisions he made, which is fine. You know, I encourage you to do that, but it does wear down on the person responsible for that. And when you list those things out individually, none of them sound overwhelming, but when you combine them over weeks, months, or even years perhaps, it becomes this constant background pressure that never really switches off. Because even when the raid ends, those responsibilities don't end with it. There's always another message to answer, another issue to sort out, another thing that needs maintaining. And I think that's where the burnout becomes dangerous in guilds, not because officers suddenly hate the game, but because over time they stop feeling like players and start feeling like caretakers. And the difficult part is that a lot of good officers are exactly the kind of people who won't complain about it. They'll just quietly keep handling things until eventually they realize they're exhausted. That's why I think leadership teams need to be very careful about responsibility, slowly concentrating onto one person. Because it rarely happens intentionally, it just happens because someone is reliable. And the more reliable they are, the more things naturally get handed to them. Until eventually the guild depends on them more than anyone sort of realised. I think another difficult part about leadership is that they're almost never fully relaxed. Even during raid, you're watching mechanics, you're also watching the atmosphere, you're tracking mistakes, but also morale. You're thinking about progression, attendance for the next week, recruitment problems, whether people are getting frustrated with each other or with the pace of progress. Your brain really never turns off. At least it doesn't for me. I can't speak for everybody, but that's how it feels for me. And the longer that goes on without support, the heavier it becomes, especially because officers often feel responsible for everyone else's experience. If the raid feels bad, they blame themselves. If morale drops, they blame themselves. If recruitment struggles, they blame themselves. Even when some of those things are outside of their control. And I think that responsibility wears down more than anything else. Another thing that contributes to burnout is when effort doesn't feel shared. Not because players are lazy, most players simply don't see the full picture, and that's the way it's supposed to be. They see the raid night, because that's what they show up for, and that's what they're there to do. They don't see the officer conversations afterwards, they don't see recruitment posts, they don't see weeks of trying to fill a role, and they just hopefully see the smooth schedule. They don't see how much work goes into keeping that schedule stable. And over time, officers can start feeling isolated, like they're carrying the weight of the guild while everyone else just participates in it. And that feeling is dangerous, because once the leadership starts feeling disconnected from the community they're managing, motivation can drop very quickly. And the scary part is that burned out officers usually keep going for a while. That's why it's hard to notice. They show up, still organize things, they still raid lead, they still handle problems, but emotionally they've already checked out. And once someone reaches that stage, it becomes pretty difficult to recover without real changes being put in place. So I think this is also why some guilds collapse so suddenly from the outside. To regular players, it feels random. Oh, the GM quit, the officers disappeared. But usually that burnout has been building for months, and the guild only notices once the people holding everything together finally stop holding it together. So the question becomes, how do you avoid this from happening? And honestly, I think it starts with understanding that leadership has to be sustainable. A lot of guilds operate like they're trying to survive the current week instead of the entire tier. Everything becomes urgent, every issue needs attention right now, and immediately every responsibility stays centralized. But not every problem needs one person handling all of it. Good leadership isn't about controlling everything, it's about building systems that don't rely entirely on one person to survive. Delegation matters a lot here. I can't reiterate this enough. Delegation. You may not be good at delegation, but I recommend if you are a guild leader or someone in the guild master position, you need to practice your delegation. It needs to be a skill that you are good at. If not, it will slowly eat you. And I think there's many guild leaders struggling with delegation because they feel like they personally need to hold every part of the guild together. But if your guild completely falls apart the moment one person steps back, the structure was never stable to begin with. I also think leadership teams need to communicate with each other more honestly. A lot of officer conversations only happen when there's a problem, and over time that creates an environment where every discussion feels stressful. Sometimes officers just need space to talk openly, not as leaders, but just as people who are tired and trying to keep things together. Because burnout gets worse when people feel like they're having to silently carry it. And honestly, regular players can help more than they probably realize. Sometimes the smallest things reduce pressure massively. Showing appreciation, helping maintain atmosphere, reducing unnecessary drama, taking responsibility for preparation instead of needing reminders constantly. Because burnout rarely comes from one massive issue, it usually comes from hundreds of smaller pressures stacking over time without relief. And finally, I think guild leaders need to accept something that's genuinely difficult. You cannot care more than the entire guild combined. You can guide the environment, support it, and lead it, but if leadership is constantly sacrificing their own enjoyment just to keep the guild functioning, eventually there's nothing left to give. And once that happens, the guild doesn't just lose an officer, it usually loses stability itself. And at the end of the day, healthy guilds aren't built on one exhausted person holding everything together forever. They're built on shared responsibility, clear communication, and sustainable leadership. An environment where officers are allowed to enjoy the game too. Because once leadership stops enjoying the game, the guild usually starts feeling it, not long after the fact. Thanks guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Have you ever seen officer burnout happen in a guild? Have you experienced it? And did people notice before it was too late? Let me know down in the comments below. And thanks. I'll catch you guys next time. Peace.